Hello, you beautiful people out there, and welcome to the Banner Gaming's look at endgame rating. Today, we're going to be looking at how endgame rating is developing in Legion and how it relates to what we've seen in Warlords of Draenor. This is Kimo.
And I'm Wisdom. So, in order to kick this off, we really do want to take a look at what we've seen so far inside of Warlords. Now, personally speaking, I think that we've seen some generally good things, right? We've had some fairly solid encounters, and it's made way for a really kind of engaging story. We've had characters tracking across the entire expansion, and even if the Warlords of Draenor haven't maybe been as prominent as we were expecting, they've still been major players in the game that we've seen.
Not to mention that, say whatever you want about the expansion, the rating and the art and the questing has definitely shined through. And the raids, I think, in Warlords, in my opinion, have been the best to date.
I agree. I think that we've seen some really, really enjoyable and pretty clever encounters that haven't gotten as old as or really nearly as stale as some of the old ones have. So, what we're seeing here in Legion is that raids are set to come out the same way that they have in Warlords, right? So, that's going to give us a small 7 raid instance right off the bat. In Warlords, this was Highmaul. In Legion, this is going to be the Emerald Nightmare. It's a spin on the Emerald Dream, but we're here to talk about the raid structure. Following that, we saw a 10 boss release afterwards that was a part of the same tier, right? This was our Blackrock Foundry in Warlords and Palace of Suramar in Legion. And this is going to be capped off with Gul'dan. He's going to be our new Blackhand. And, I think it's kind of an interesting way to take it. I personally was not a huge fan of the staggered release. One of the big issues that we saw here was that the loot in Highmaul really became irrelevant once Blackrock Foundry was open. You didn't have people going back and forth. They weren't two raids that you did alongside each other or even things that you'd bother farming any of your old content for. You never went back to Highmaul once Blackrock Foundry was out. It just wasn't worthwhile.
I just want to make a point in that, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Remember during BlackRock, they buffed all the items in BlackRock by 5 item levels? I'm pretty sure the community was saying they felt like, what's the point of BlackRock? Because they had Highmaul for so long. So, what's the point of the next raid tier? Even if it's not a tier, call it whatever you want, the next raid release, if it's not going to be the same, if it's going to be the same item level. So either A, they release both dungeons at the same time with the same item level, but if they do a staggered release, the other raid has to have a higher item level, or people are going to feel like, what's the point?
Yes, you are pulling the words right out of my mouth there. We saw Blizzard actually admit when they were giving out the eye level buff that it was kind of a mistake to release the raids in the way that they had because it really wasn't as distinct as it should have been, right? Having tier in one and no tier in the other, gear that was at least for most specs reasonably well itemized relative to the total crapshoot that we saw in Highmaul of just random stats on items. Plus, you had way better itemized trinkets and things like that. It really was two different tiers. One of them just didn't have any set bonuses. So I'm really pretty surprised that they're repeating this stunt over again. Now, initially, when I heard that there were going to be multiple raids released early on, I was expecting something like the Cataclysm system, right? This is where we had distinct raids coming out simultaneously. All three of the opening raids in Cataclysm were available at the same time. And on top of that, tier pieces were spread between every single raid, right? You had hands in one, I think legs and chest in another, and then head, shoulders, and
Knees and toes?
yes, knees and toes in the last. So, and that had some really powerful points to it. You could go between the different raids at your discretion, right? And one of the big advantages that has is raids are designed in such a way typically that you have the easy bosses up front, right? Think about your Kargath or your like even if I like Twin Ogron, that's technically the second boss in Heimwall. It's a relatively easy fight. And so if you have more raids, you have more of those easy bosses up front, right? It's an easier way to get gear that you need. And on top of that, because you can spread it out, you can knock out one raid in one night or maybe double up and do two in one night. And then you have a whole separate night to dedicate to progression or a separate instance, something like that. It also really allows for elaborating on the story, right? You can tell three different narratives simultaneously by just having more detail in every fight. It also allowed for really distinct kinds of mechanics, right? We see flavors of mechanics throughout instances. In Hellfire Citadel, we have a lot of green goo all over the place. It's really bad for you. I mean, that's not necessarily a new thing, but that contrasts to Blackrock Foundry with having, some instant kill void zone mechanics. Think about Thogar. So we see different kinds of trends depending on where we are, and you can have more diversity when you have more raids. Of course, this was really offset by having the have group will travel. Right, this was a great perk for those of you who weren't around at the time. It allowed you to summon on, I think, a 2-hour cooldown everybody in your entire raid group to one player's location, and everybody had this. So you'd get your guild to level 25, and then you could go pretty much wherever you wanted instantly. And it was not that big of a deal to get between three different, wildly different parts of the world when you had someone with an alt parked in the right place. So that was something that I was really hoping that we would see more of, and it just didn't come together here, and it was not the way the Warlords worked out. So I'm a little bit concerned.
Well, I think we can both agree if they are going to do a staggered release, there has to be an item level difference um, between the two dungeons. I did not like, assuming there's a item level difference. I don't like that there was no set pieces in High Mall because it felt like, High Mall was a good couple months. I don't remember exactly, but it felt weird being in a raid with no set pieces. And not only that, if they make smaller raids, not only can they better tell stories if they wanted to do more than one big bad guy, they can make each raid visually different. They have a better, bigger art team than they ever had. So they can put multiple enemies, big bosses, in multiple dungeons or raids that have different art styles. So it doesn't feel like you're always going to the same visual place. So there are some good pros to that.
Yeah, and I think that that adds a lot for people who become tired of looking at the same kinds of fights over and over again. The fights that we saw back in Throne of the Four Winds were very different than anything that you'd really seen before, especially, the weird flight mechanics that we got on Alakir and things like that. And I know that there are plenty of people who are tired of the way that fights work in Hellfire Citadel, and I think that they did some good things to try and diversify that by including things like Iskar and like robot fight, Sakrathar. So those fights add different kind of unique mechanics in that keep people more engaged, but at the same time, that's 2 out of 13, and you don't necessarily have the flexibility and really the genuine diversity that you get by dividing the raids up differently. So
And not only that though, I feel like it's story dependent. So if Gul'dan is supposed to be essentially the main bad guy of the first round of raiding, maybe that does only require then the two raids because there's one big bad guy. Now, in Warlords, they could have made many different smaller raids because you had essentially they set up to be seven warlords, and you could have done a lot with that storyline and a lot with multiple raids. Well, I don't know if this storyline, I can't tell yet, it would be beneficial to have the multiple smaller raids. They could have done a lot with the warlords. I mean, we killed one of them, it was Nerzul, in a dungeon. Like, I wasn't expecting that. Like, it was just weird how they died, you know? It just
yeah,
wasn't.
having everything from dungeon bosses to the guy that gets away at the end of the expansion, that was kind of weird. I didn't think that it really shaped up maybe the way that we had wanted to see it, which is why it is kind of concerning to think that this is what we're setting ourselves up for again for an entire expansion. So I actually think that they might do themselves a favor by equalizing the item level and just spreading out the tier between the two raids, rather than try and really draw a line in the sand with an eye level buff. I think equalizing it all the way around is maybe the way to go, because that way there's still relevance, right? Some people will have their best in slot dropping in one raid, and other people will have it in another. And really, length aside, I don't see an issue with that, right? My only real concern with that sort of a system would be not having the time or be able to split up the raid in such a way that you can check the boxes that everybody needs, when you're 6 months in.
Right. That's actually exactly what I was going to say. It might make Raiders feel overwhelmed. And to Blizzard's side, it might make their content be shorter. So if they release everything, and so say there's so there's 17 bosses in the first 2 tiers. If they release the 7-1, then 4 months later release the 10-1, it will make the content last longer for the players and be fresher instead of releasing all 17 at the start. But two, it won't make everybody feel super panicked and rushed to, there'll be no fighting on where you're going. Oh, excuse me. There'll be no fighting on where you're going, and there'll be none of this, you know, min-maxing mentality of having everybody do everything all week. It might be less stressful. There's pros and cons to both sides, I think.
I think if they're going to take anything away from what we've seen in Warlords of Draenor and in the raids that we've seen, it's clear that they're getting a lot of the fights to be better. We're not dealing with a lot of generic tank and big fights. We see ads be relevant and things like that, and we see trends that make the fights interesting and distinct and unique. And one of those big things is there's a continued emphasis on personal accountability. I mean, I mentioned Iskar before. That's a great example of a fight where one person can wipe everybody if they just don't do their job. I can't make anybody else in my raid team throw the eye, and it's just frustrating.
Also, one thing I'm really looking forward to is the Emerald Nightmare. I mean, it is in a raid that people have been expecting as an expansion for a long time. The Emerald Dream, Emerald Nightmare has been speculated for a long time. So I think it's going to be a really, really cool lore aspect for people who've been wanting this for a long time. And other than that, the last thing I really want to say is I really enjoyed the personal accountability kind of workings of all of the raids. I feel like if you completely fall asleep in any of the boss fights, there is a lot of things that can kill your group and kill you, even at a certain gear level. So I really like that every fight kept you on your toes. We're going to do a separate video on the level of difficulty and accountability and the normal mode changes coming very soon. But I feel like they're going in a great direction, and raiding has never been better. So I have all the faith in the world that Legion's raids are going to blow our pants off. Other than that, this ends our video on looking at how endgame rating is developing Legion. Thank you for listening. This is Kimo. If you like our video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. If you like our art, please visit our wonderful artist link below.
And I've been Wisdom. Something I'd love to know is what everybody's favorite raid to date is. Did you like the way that we saw raids being released in Warlords? If you didn't, or even if you did, let us know down below. And thank you all for watching, and have a good night.
Bye-bye. For video.